Okay. Any questions up here? Before you begin, let's take roll. We have a quorum.
Weber.
Here.
Chesbrough.
Here.
Dickinson.
Here.
Grove. Mansour.
Thank you.
I apologize for being late. Double booked committees is my excuse.
Just too popular. But we're glad to have you here.
I'm glad to be here.
Okay. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just as a starter, by way of refreshing my recollection, we had legislation last year that was proposed to effectuate a consolidation or a transfer, excuse me, of the drinking water programs to the regional water board. Isn't that right? And that legislation did not reach the governor. Is that also right? And I don't know what kind of public testimony we're going to have, but is this proposal to make this transfer essentially the same as was proposed in the legislation? Or if it deviates, in what significant ways does it deviate?
It deviates significantly, and it's a transition to the State Water Board. That was always in the legislation as well as in this administration proposal. The administration's approach here is really to focus on the synergies that will result from moving the program under the State Water Board. I think the actual change that's proposed, what's moving where, is similar, but the reasons behind it and the gains to be made and the changes are really quite a bit different, and the focus is on the future and be able to have everything under one roof that relates to water quality and to coordinate programs such as recycled water and others that just make sense to have them set up that way.
That is my recollection of what the rationale was.
That's good.
For the legislation too.
Yeah. Initially, the legislation was about some of the challenges that I just updated you on as far as our financial assistance programs. And that really kind of was the basis for it. But things have evolved dramatically, in part because our program's been quite successful the last couple of years in the department, and in part because of things like the drought and other things that are happening that make sense to have the programs together.
Mm-hmm. I had a couple particular questions. Beyond that, the staff report indicates on page 8 under the regulatory program that the DWP would be organized as a separate division. The deputy director would have authority to grant or deny water system permit applications, and those would not be subject to state board review or permit issuance and enforcement would be delegated to the regional water boards. It then goes on to say the proposal does not include a proposal to extend statutorily mandated minimum penalties for waste discharge violations to drinking water violations. It's that last sentence that can you explain what will happen under the proposal with respect to the statutory penalties, who administers them, and under what circumstances under the proposed transfer?
Yeah, the bottom line of, I think, this paragraph in general is to demonstrate and respond to the stakeholders' concerns and desires about the regulatory program in the drinking water program, the regulatory aspect of the program, which is different than the water boards and regional water boards in some ways. And so that last sentence refers to mandated minimum penalties, which are required on the clean water side of the house, wastewater. In drinking water, they are not. And many stakeholders in the drinking water agencies, public health, they like the approach that the drinking water program has. It's a very hands-on, helpful approach. We have very minimal amounts of fines, in the thousands of dollars every year. We don't utilize fines very much for compliance.
Okay,
so that's what the nature of this paragraph is really about, is making sure everyone that was concerned knows that it's not going to go to the regional boards, it's not going to be this type of model, it's going to stay the way it is.
And penalties associated with waste discharge violations won't be applied to drinking water violations?
Absolutely.
Okay. The way this was written was just a little unclear to me. In the The next category under the MCL setting, it talks about rulemaking continuing through the regular rulemaking process under the APA, and it would be this same deputy director who would oversee the rulemaking. Is that the case?
Yeah, the rulemaking process would stay very similar to how it is today. The Administrative Procedures Act applies to both agencies. The key difference here would be that the State Water Board will be involved in the process, and so while in our current structure we send our regulation packages for review up through our chain of command to our agency and the Governor's office, the Water Board, because it's a board overseen entity, would run those up through the board and includes a public process at the board as well. I think that's the primary difference. Again, Liz Haven is here if we want to have specific questions about how the board works, because that's outside my area of expertise.
So the deputy director would be housed within the State Water Board, is that right?
Right.
And not in public health?
Right.
Okay. And obviously there have been some conversations among interested parties, it sounds like, in developing this approach. Can you represent what the views are of the interested parties, particularly those who raised concern about the legislation last year and were concerned about a transfer from public health?
Well, it would take a lot of time to do so, but the overall concerns fall into the categories that we outlined and that are outlined in your package here. As far as the regulatory program, I mentioned the interest in keeping it the way it is and with the districts and how they work. There are concerns with the financial assistance program and making sure that the money is moved out as quickly as possible to drinking water projects. So that part of the administration's proposal is to move the two state revolving funds into the same entity at the Water Board in response to that. The other concerns, a lot of them will keep it running the way it's running, all the good things, and that will be this new division of drinking water under the State Water Board, have this new deputy director, and many of the programs will keep running the way they are today. The staff will move over as a block, and they'll continue doing a lot of the same work they're doing today. The transition plan I mentioned that will be coming out this month will really outline all the things that were addressed during the process of looking at the transition to date, as well as what it used to look like, what it will look like organizationally, and some of the synergies to be gained. So if you have a specific area that you're interested in, I could...
Well, what I'm trying to understand, simply put, is whether those who were concerned about the transfer as it was embodied in the legislation that we considered last year are now have had their concerns assuaged and are supportive or at least neutral on the way this transfer is structured, or have no view. And whether, if you can't characterize that, I understand. I'm just asking, if you can, how would you characterize it?
Well, I obviously can't speak for all the stakeholders, and some of them will probably speak for themselves shortly. But the process was intended to engage stakeholders as much as possible. There's actually a report that has been prepared that's a summary of the task force and the outcomes of the discussions. And while there was never a design to seek unanimity or consensus, there were a lot of items that were addressed in that process to most of the members' satisfaction that led to the structure that we're describing today. But I would not say that everybody was happy with everything, but generally it was, I think, all the concerns were at least addressed, and many of them to the satisfaction of those that had raised them.
Yeah. I just say that this is coming as in the context of the budget, when we had a fairly robust policy discussion last year, and it does give me some pause, at least for purposes of reflection about whether this is the way to effectuate the change or not in light of that policy discussion. That's why I was interested in what the various parties thought about this proposal. Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions here? Do we have any public comment? Okay, yes.
Excuse me, Chair Weber and Assemblymember Dickinson, Mark Newton, and Assemblymember Chesbro, Mark Newton with the Legislative Analyst Office. I just wanted to respond just quickly, Assemblymember Dickinson, to your querying about the concept of statutorily mandated minimum penalties. And just to give you a little bit of history and context on that issue, the State Water Resources Control Board actually has a pretty lengthy history with this concept. The legislature passed legislation around about 15 years ago to enact these minimum penalties. This was in part a response to U.S. EPA audits of the Water Board that had similar concerns as they do now with the Department of Public Health in terms of the consistency of enforcement and the aggressiveness of the enforcement. The state of New Jersey had a very lengthy track record with minimum penalties, and which provided a lot of effectiveness benefits. So California sort of adopted the concept, and it actually has proven quite successful in terms of compliance at the Water Board. So as my colleague Amber DG mentioned, that we're recommending some reporting to the legislature, and one of the reporting requirements that we would recommend is to have reporting on enforcement trends after this transition to the to the Water Board. And we would recommend that the legislature sort of reevaluate this policy issue of whether minimum penalties may be an important and valuable enforcement tool to instill in the drinking water program. So we think it's something that the legislature should monitor.
And we have some public comments. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Weber. Members, Gail Matthew for the California Dental Association.
We have about a minute and a half. Okay.
Won't even come close to that. Our concern last time around and this time has been about the Community Water Fluoridation Program, which is a public health function, and CDA very much appreciates that all of the conversations, all the indications are that this transition will keep the public health functions and protect the public health functions of the Community Water Fluoridation Program in public health. We also think it's critical that the memorandum of understanding that they're talking about will really define the working relationship between the Department of Public Health and the State Water Board around the necessary functions that will keep the local community water fluoridation programs effective and successful. And similarly, we believe it's important to have legislative language that is really specific about the activities that will stay within public health, within the DPH. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members. Kat DeBerg with the Health Officers Association of California. We're one of the stakeholders that you mentioned, Mr. Dickinson. We remain opposed to the transfer. We appreciate all of the work that the department and the stakeholders have done to maintain the public health focus of the program if it moves. But fundamentally, we believe, like the legislature believes, that every human being has a right to clean water. And we're unconvinced that transferring this program from one department where it has a public health focus to a different department is actually going to help get clean water to these communities that need it. Every dollar that's spent on moving personnel is dollars that aren't going to help local water systems. And the staff time that it's going to take to move the program is also staff time that's not taken giving assistance to local programs. So we remain opposed, but we do appreciate all the work that you're doing, and thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Mario Guerrero with SEIU Local 1000. We represent the members in the drinking water program, and I just wanted to come in, and I did hear that there is a plan to transfer these staff, and I just wanted to come in and say that we hope that, of course, that you work with our union to make sure that it's a smooth transfer, that it includes, of course, appropriate notices and, of course, any considerations for classification impacts. And so we look forward to the reports if this does move forward, the report backs as this moves forward. Thank you very much.
Okay. Any other public comments? Okay. That having been said, this is an item that's actually up for approval today, stipulating that this action would conform to any action taken in the Assembly Budget Subcommittee number 3, including the adoption of trailer bill language to implement the program's transfer. So we've been asked to act on this matter at this time. Are we ready to act on this matter?
Well, it does seem, at least from my standpoint, there are a couple outstanding questions. Is there a harm to keeping this open?
I don't know if there's a harm to it or not. I know we're going to be consistent with sub 3, whatever they do, the other.
Right.
So,
I would say that some of what was articulated in public testimony is still the question that I have, and some assurance about transfer if it occurs with respect to positions, classifications, and personnel. That some elaboration on that I think would be helpful for us to have, and there's specificity or greater specificity perhaps about what stays in public health. I think it is another aspect was articulated in testimony that is a concern of mine.
Okay, we can hold it over. That's not a problem. We'll wait to get those answers, and we'll check also with sub 3 and see where they are with the matter. Okay. We passed over an item that we were also asked to approve, an item that is the implementation of SB 669, which was item number 2. The auto injection transfer and certificated programs. I don't think we had any comments from the public on that, and no other.
Also moved.
It's been moved. Second. Okay. Want to call roll call?
Weber.
Aye.
Chesbro. Dickinson. Grove. Mansour.
Okay, we'll keep the roll over to the end of the meeting, but it's out in case the others want to add on. All right, fine. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll move to our item number 2, which is the contract conversion. Okay.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members. I'm Drew Johnson, Acting Deputy Director for the Center for Chronic Disease Prevention and Health Promotion with the Department of Public Health.
I don't know if people can hear you. Can you hear them in the back? They can't hear you.
Sorry. Better?
Okay, is that better? Say something and we can...
Yes. Test?
They can hear you now. Thank you.
I'll introduce myself nonetheless again. Drew Johnson, Acting Deputy Director, Center for Chronic Disease Prevention and Health Promotion with the Department of Public Health. Before you today is a BCP that proposes to establish 45 new positions to assume much of the nutrition, education, obesity prevention work that will discontinue through a contract that we currently have in place at the end of September of this year. This contract conversion proposal is similar to other proposals that this subcommittee has entertained, reviewed, and acted upon from the department over the past several years. The overarching justification for this is to be compliant with state law. Article 7 of the state constitution has an implied mandate that work that can be competently and adequately developed by and executed by state civil service should be done by state civil service positions. We estimate that there will be over $12 million in savings as part of this contract conversion. One of the questions that was posed in the subcommittee agenda was the importance of maintaining local partnerships, and we acknowledge and recognize the value of local community-based organization partnerships along with our local health jurisdiction contracts. We are proposing from the state level that we have 7 technical assistance and resource capacity contracts, regional ones, in place to help our local health jurisdictions develop the capacity to execute obesity prevention activities. We're fortunate that 2 of those 7 contracts were awarded to our PHI, which is our current contractor now. So we're happy to have them continue along with us in the fold for at least the short-term foreseeable future. We've also are planning to develop a deliverable-based contract to a CBO for development of curricula, in-language curricula, which we have determined we don't have the capacity within state government to do. Hmong, Laotian type design work that of the Central Valley, for example. So we did, as part of our overarching analysis of what we can do in-house with those 45 positions, and then made a determination of what we were unable to do, and that we would contract out. And perhaps most importantly, we are requiring within our local health jurisdiction allocations that a large proportion of it, depending on how much an allocation a county jurisdiction receives, is contracted out to subcontracted to community-based organizations. So for example, in the current year, we have over 180 CBOs subcontracted through the local health jurisdiction. So we have some very acute knowledge and awareness that this kind of partnership reaches all of our 185, or attempts to reach our 185% federal poverty level clientele across the state. The positions themselves that we propose to establish are not technically exceptional in and of themselves. Health educators, associate governmental program analysts, which is a very generic journey level analyst position that's utilized across state government. Some associate health, public health nutritionist, nurse nutritionist, excuse me. And so we think that those types of positions to dedicate to the activities that are described in our approved USDA plan is something that we can handle within the state. One of the other questions that was posed in the agenda was a response to a letter that we received from USDA. We receive funding through CDSS, through an interagency agreement, and USDA contracts directly with CDSS. And there was some question about some of the timing and some of the transition. And as far as the timing goes, we were unable to talk with USDA prior to the release of the governor's budget, just due to the confidential nature of the process. Since then, we've had discussions with USDA. They've asked for some transition planning, which we are preparing currently to give to them. We've been in very close conversations with CDSS as well. The timing they said it was kind of a mid-year change, and we're thinking that it's a little bit different than that because the contract expires at the end of September, which coincides with the beginning of the next federal fiscal year of October 1st. We're required each year as part of our application process to CDSS, which then transfers it to USDA, that we provide a plan by July 15th, which CDSS provides to USDA by August 15th, and that will include this in its entirety, the analysis of these 45 positions, the justifications, the interventions that we're proposing, et cetera. So we do think USDA has asked CDSS for a more recent, more current assessment of that, in which we're preparing that response now and plan to give them in the near future. And we'd be happy to keep the subcommittee apprised of that transition as we go along.
Okay. Any other comments from LAO or Finance?
Amber DG, Legislative Analyst Office. We recently received a copy of the USDA letter that the department spoke about, and after reviewing that letter, we are recommending that the department provide additional updates, as they indicated that they would be willing to, on their ongoing conversations with the USDA, to indicate whether the USDA approves of the proposed contract conversion, and to indicate whether they are satisfied that the department will be able to fund the proposed level of state staff, given the projected funding cuts that are being phased in over the next several years.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay.
Madam Chair. So the savings are are federal dollars,
That's correct.
not general fund savings?
That's correct.
Okay. So I'm a little unclear on what the problem is that we're trying to solve here. If you're saying that it's being driven by the constitutional provision about contracting out, but that, as I understood it, the way I have to go back and I haven't read that provision for a while, but the way you laid it out, it referred to services that could be provided by civil servants. Are you saying that there's no added benefit that's unique to the local partnerships that would be lost if you brought it all in-house?
I think we do have the responsibility to be compliant with the law. We do think that we can have those same kind of community-based relationships through our local health jurisdictions. For example, we have over 180 contracts, subcontracts with CBOs that are ethnic-based, faith-based, county offices of education, school districts, and the like. So we do have far reach into the local health jurisdictions.
I'm not understanding, because you're talking about withdrawing, the state withdrawing from these contracts, but you're saying we will still be contracting out or still have partnerships with Can you
We'll
explain?
have partnerships, the ongoing partnerships with our local health jurisdictions. So the $12 million in savings, for example, by this contract conversion, we are going to provide to our local health jurisdictions, and we're requiring that they also subcontract that work to community-based organizations, so that and the idea is that we weren't going to necessarily lose some of that community-based partnership that we have currently in our contract. The work that we do, as far as when we do a sit down and do an analysis of the activities to meet the state plan that has been approved by USDA, we take a look at it and say, is there a job classification within state civil service that is comparable to the duties and activities that we need to do to complete the task? And if the answer is yes, then we feel compelled to actually establish the state position. If it's no, and there are some exceptions to the state law which allow us to contract out short-term in nature, exceptionally technical work that is otherwise not provided through the state civil service classification process, then we can do that. And we're taking advantage of that as well. Like I said, in the curricula design for in-language Hmong and Laotian as an example, our technical assistance capacity building, regional contracts, and so we are trying to take advantage of that as well for that work which we feel that we cannot otherwise do in state civil service.
Well, I mean, I'd have to sit down and read the BCP, I guess, to find out, but based on what I've seen in the agenda and heard here, it just seems to me that we're talking about withdrawing money that's on the ground out there being spent fairly efficiently by community-based groups and bringing it in to build up the capacity of the department. That's what it looks like to me.
Well, the current contract that we have is supported by 70 positions. We're proposing 45 positions here, along with 13 additional positions that we would contract in an interagency agreement with CSU UC to do some research and evaluation. So we're going from 70 positions to 58, which contributes to part of, but not all, of the saving. Okay.
Very confusing, but I'll listen to it.
You're moving 70 positions that are community positions, basically, are external positions. Is that what it is, in-house? And therefore, you're only going to use 55 of those, is that right? No?
Not exactly, because the 70 positions they're in the contract, many of them which work in admin, administering the contract and doing some of the intervention development, which we would move in-house. So they're not necessarily in the community, those 70 positions. They're not, in fact. The current contract does have some provisions that allow it to, and they do subcontract with community-based organizations. We feel that we can still meet the community partnership need and acknowledge their expertise by working through our local health jurisdiction and the requirements that we've applied to them to ensure that we have some outreach into some of the communities that are difficult to otherwise access.
Okay. All right, no other comments at the table. We'll hear our public comment. You'll have a minute and a half each.